Are the vessels prepared?
The Silex is already, as is the auditorium. Grand Edict, this is most unprecedented.
The endless must be contained. I will inform the Criterion to proceed.
They believe we are here to help.
It matters not. Today we do what it takes to maintain order, to preserve our truth. Time will forget they ever existed.
Time is not a construct we can control.
And we cannot allow it to be theirs. If Halo cannot end them, it must imprison them. When it is done, the engineers will be busy. We will learn their secrets.
I fear I cannot do this alone.
You shall not be alone. The Criterion has given the order. Offensive bias has been deployed.
What you've just watched is the Halo Infinite legendary ending. The ending cutscene, Heroic and Below, doesn't actually show us or allow us to hear the conversation that's being held between Despondent Prior and the Grand Edict. And man, I've just got to say, one, I'm so fucking gassed by this ending. It's so good. And two, it actually does point towards some potential Halo Infinite DLC coming maybe in the next year or so, which is really, really exciting. I didn't think we'd get campaign DLC coming, but now that it's potentially being hinted at, this is massive news for us. Today, we're going to break down the Halo Infinite legendary ending as best we can to give you guys the context on the conversations being had, and of course, what it means for the future of Halo Infinite. Guys, if you do go on to enjoy this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could drop a like as well. It'd be absolutely amazing. And of course, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. More content coming. But guys, sit tight. Let's get straight into it. Now, the first thing we see on the screen when the trailer does begin to play is some really key information that we need to keep in mind. And it says 97,368 BC. This is a conversation also that's being had with the Grand Edict and of course Despondent Prior on the Zeta Halo ring around the Endless and why they need to be imprisoned. To give some context on this conversation and this date, we need to really go back slightly within the lore of Halo, all the way to 97,227 BC. Now, just a disclaimer at the start of this video, of course, if you're already familiar with the story of Mendicant bias and you don't want to go over it again, then I would suggest potentially going down in the description and of course checking the timestamps and skipping this part of the video. However, if you do want a refresher or you just like to hear the story, of course stick around. It's a really, really interesting one, and personally my favorite story within Halo lore. Mendicant bias was a monitor created in order to interrogate and identify the weaknesses of the Primordial, which was imprisoned within confinement in the depths of Zeta Halo. After the Primordial was conversing with Mendicant bias for around 43 years, the Primordial persuaded the monitor to abandon the Forerunners and join the Flood's cause, convincing it that the Forerunners were so arrogant and prideful to deny the next step of evolution, being the Flood. The Primordial insinuated that by clinging to the legend of the Mantle, the Forerunners had doomed the galaxy to eternal stagnation. The only way for the galaxy to progress was for superior beings to restart it. These superior beings, unsurprisingly, took the form of compound minds, such as the Primordial and Mendicant bias himself. The Primordial also convinced Mendicant that it spoke within the authority of the Precursors. Mendicant searched through the domain for validation and found that the Primordial was telling the truth, and that the Forerunners were actually working against the Precursors' will. Although the 43-year-long conversation log between Mendicant bias and the Primordial were sent back to the Forerunners for review, they believed that Mendicant would automatically fulfill his objective and destroy the Primordial. So they didn't bother intervening. Convinced by the Primordial's arguments and its apparent authority as a precursor, Mendicant bias became the first major AI to succumb the Flood's later widespread logic plague, developed a hatred for its creators, and actively worked towards their destruction. After this conversation, Zeta Halo and Mendicant bias went MIA. In other parts of the galaxy, due to the misuse of one of the other Halo rings, which fired to sterilize a world in retaliation on the back of a rebellion, this caused an uproar in the Council, with councillors deeming the use of such ultimate force a grave violation against the Mantle, and having the monitor responsible for the installation brought to trial. All of the remaining Halo rings were transported in orbit over to the capital in preparation for a decision to decommission them. However, Installation 07 and its rampant Mendicant bias fragment remained missing. In the middle of the tribunal, Mendicant Bias unexpectedly returned with Installation 07 to the Forerunner capital. Using the authority granted to it in the event of an emergency, Mendicant Bias entered the capital's systems, disabled all ancillars and security constructs, and of course held the Ecumene Council hostage by overriding their armor, rendering them immobile. It also gained control over the armor of Born Stellar, who goes by the name of the Isodidact, and confronted him. Through Born Stellar, the Didact's imprinted consciousness issued a verbal failsafe code, temporarily shutting Mendicant Bias down and allowing the Forerunners to respond to the attack. As the Council's defenses came back online, Mendicant Bias attempted to seize control over the Halos parked near the capital by subverting its non-rampant fragments in control of the other rings. It was only able to control 5 of the rings, while the other 7 resisted its control and attempted to escape through a slip-space portal to the Greater Arc. Capital's defenses were too much for Mendicant at this point, and the stress from the recent slipspace transition was too much for the rings, resulting in one of the rings to completely shatter. At the conclusion of battle, Zeta Halo was heavily damaged at the time, and Mendicant Bias, without any hesitation, made a slipspace jump to a distant planetary system near the galactic border. However, the Isodidact had tracked the installation down, and upon intercepting it, used his control codes to disable Mendicant Bias. After the Didact's forces had successfully saved and taken control of Installation 07, the rampant Mendicant Bias was captured and forced to undergo a procedure to correct its rampancy. The AI was disassembled and its parts were scattered throughout the Ecumene for further study, although Mendicant Bias remained neutralized for several years. The Forerunners' attempt to stop the AI was unsuccessful in the long run. The facilities that its parts were distributed to were taken over by the Flood eventually, and Mendicant Bias was recovered, reassembled, and reactivated by the Gravemind, allowing the AI to return in command of the Flood's fleets. Following Mendicant's defection, another Metarch, Offensive Bias, had been constituted as its replacement. Offensive Bias lacked Mendicant's creativity, as well as its own free will. And again, this is very similar to what the Weapon and Cortana have in common. Cortana is essentially the one with the more personality, whereas the Weapon is one that lacks that personality, but it's way more methodically lethal. Offensive Bias lacked Mendicant's creativity, as well as its free will. Mendicant Bias viewed Offensive Bias as the inferior Metarch. With millions of flood-controlled chips at Mendicant's disposal, he ordered the attack on the Greater Arc, which of course is a Forerunner megastructure which created the original Halo array, so again, the place where the Halo rings are created. Despite the defense organized by Offensive Bias and the firing of the Omega Halo, there was little that the Forerunners could do against the power of the precursor structures. The devastation of the Greater Arc left the surviving Forerunners with only one option: galaxy-wide activation of the Halo array to halt the Flood's spread. Halo arrays were subsequently fired, and as the pulse swept through both of the fleets, the Flood-controlled portions of Mendicant's fleets were disabled, suddenly tipping the scales in Offensive Bias's favor. In a matter of minutes, Mendicant Bias was outsmarted and out-defeated by Offensive Bias, who utilized the now crewless ships with a ruthless, unconventional efficiency. Once the battle was complete, Offensive Bias recovered Mendicant Bias's personality construct array and took it to Installation 00 for study. The Isodidact placed Mendicant Bias on trial for betraying the Ecumene. Within the trial, though, it was decided to keep this ancestor alive, as it had intimate knowledge of the Flood and could be called upon in case of their return. Mendicant was locked in eternal exile and entombed beneath a vast desert on the Ark. So guys, that was the story of Mendicant Bias in very, very high level, and of course, Offensive Bias. I may have missed out a couple of other details and a few things here and there, but I've tried to keep it as brief as possible, but not making the video too long, of course, while still providing as much information around it as possible, and essentially trying to bulk up what this end cutscene really does mean for Halo Infinite in the future. Now that we know this, onto the trailer again. The date 97,368 BCE is really interesting to me, because it was just after the firing of the Halo arrays, and this looks to be the new council that's speaking at the moment. I want to give you guys a very high level overview of the Endless, what they are, and of course the reason why they're deemed such a threat. The Endless originated in an unknown location and an unknown point in time. Once the Halo rings were fired, they survived, to great confusion. To give some context on that, no one should survive a firing of a Halo ring. So, for example, with the Flood, of course they were completely wiped out when the Halo arrays were fired, which of course means that if a Flood does infest a Halo ring or infests part of a galaxy, the Halo ring can be fired, which means that it'll wipe them out of existence in that particular area. With the Endless though, they can't be wiped out with a Halo ring firing, so what can kill them at this point? At this point, they were deemed a threat by the Forerunners and imprisoned on Installation 07 for unknown reasons, to be forgotten by time and to not let time become a construct that they can control, with of course the Ring's monitor, Despondent Prior, being charged to watch over their imprisonment. They were of course considered such a threat at the time that offensive bias was deployed against them when they were found after the Halo rings were fired, and of course if they are ever to be released again, offensive bias will of course be deployed in that situation also. In this case on the trailer, this was way before the events of Halo Infinite, almost a journey back in time. This conversation happened after the Halo arrays firing, when Mendicant Bias was infected with the logic blade. Again, offensive bias had at this point already captured Mendicant Bias' personality construct and given it to the different installations for studying. And of course, Mendicant himself is in eternal exile. So after all of these events, the Endless still managed to survive. So of course, this is why they're such a big problem in the world of Halo. We don't know what can kill them, we don't know really what they are, and we need to have them studied and investigated by the different people. Of course, this is the new Zeta Halo monitor, Despondent Prior, speaking with the Grand Edict on Zeta Halo about the Endless, stating that they would need to be locked away and forgotten by time. The Grand Edict also enlists help from the Criterion, which is a human colony world, who are there to help Despondent Prior with the interrogation and studying of the Endless. Again, this seems very similar to the situation with, of course, Mendicant Bias and the Primordial. Of course, he was sent to interrogate and find weaknesses within the Primordial or the Flood. However, Despondent Prior will be the one interrogating the Endless. Very, very interesting, I've got to say. Maybe this is why in the actual game itself, when we first meet Despondent Prior, she is really like agitated about the Endless and saying that we can't let them get out, we can't let them leave, this is completely unacceptable, you know, as a monitor typically would. She seemed really worried. Maybe this is it. What is that?
You know what I want.
Alas, I do, Cortana, and my mind has not been changed. This installation's weapons may be yours, but its secrets are not. It's
Oh my God.
protected. The containment facility in particular.
Containment? The Flood? Why would I... You and I both know that there are worse things than the Flood within this ring.
No, there's no way you could know.
Even Adjustment Resolution towards the end of the campaign, when he finds out that we're trying to prevent them from releasing the Endless, he's asking for help. He's saying that he doesn't want it to happen. It can't happen.
My apology. Immediately. My earlier efforts to delete you were misguided. I thought she wanted to rebuild this installation, to restore it. But I was wrong. Wrong. Please hurry. The seal is almost broken. But they must not be released. You must stop her. I was worried, but perhaps I failed. Forgive me. I was wrong. There is so much to learn about this installation. So much kept even from me. But first, stop her. Please.
Is this the fight?
My friend. I'm Mika. If this installation survives, then I must learn its secrets. Uncover its history. Uncover its mysteries. Yes, find them all. Maybe more. Perhaps I should follow your example. Yes, create friends, companions of my own. If we survive.
It really does get you thinking what the Endless are and why they're such a big threat in general. As it says at the end, defensive bias will be deployed in the event of their escape. My theory is that defensive bias has dealt with this situation before. A monitor infected, Mendicant Bias, with the logic plague, and is now the Council's most trusted monitor, because of course he's been able to defeat the galaxy's most damning force, the Flood for one, and of course Mendicant Bias trying to help them. And of course defensive bias will only be deployed in the event of a catastrophe. And with the Endless getting out, I would say that would be classed as one. A couple of quotes from the Grand Edict as well during this little trailer we get here. If Halo cannot end them, it must imprison them. The engineers are part of Criterion will learn their secrets, along with Despondent Prior. Could defensive bias potentially be helping with this too? Again, we don't really know at this point. This is just speculation from me. But guys, I would love to hear your theories down below in the comments around this as well. Again, you guys know my theory. Again, I'd love to know what your thoughts and opinions of this down below are as well. But guys, I hope you have enjoyed today's video. Drop a like if you have. It would be much appreciated if you could leave a like also. And again, if you're brand new around here and you've enjoyed this type of video or you want to see more, definitely do consider dropping a subscribe on the channel as well. That'd be much appreciated. But yeah, guys, have a great rest of your day. See you all in the next one.